It's not about coal versus renewable in India. Come summer, and you will hear fears about impending power crisis, as there will be news about shortage of feedstock coal. Interestingly, it is now not just about coal shortage, but renewable energy target shortage also in India. So, what is the true story? This and more in the latest episode of Energonomics. A headline that caught attention was Modi's fading renewable vision that fires up India's coal sector. Really? Then what about reports of coal shortage? And if there is a crisis, what will happen this summer? On January 19th, at an event, the Union Minister for Power and New and Renewable Energy, R.K. Singh, was quoted as saying, "No country can develop if it does not have sufficient power." The power shortage in India has come down from around 4.5% in 2014 to less than 1% today. We have ensured universal electricity access connecting 29 million homes in 19 months, which the International Energy Agency called the largest and the fastest expansion of energy access in the history of the power sector. So what is the whole story of coal versus renewable in India? I asked Vipul Tuli of Sembcorp Industries Ltd, and this is what he said.
First of all, thanks for having me, Richa. I'd like to make a couple of points. I think first is that at some level, this is a good problem for us to have. India has managed to do some very remarkable things on renewables, whether in wind or in solar or on the grid, etc., etc. But we sort of have a good problem because demand is pacing even that. And so in that sense, it's a good thing that we are having to play catch up and having to think about even further capacity addition. I think the second thing is rather than look at it as one fuel versus another fuel, the thing to do is to look at it as what is going to meet India's massive baseload power needs, and then what's going to meet its intermediate and peak power needs. All the time while transitioning faster and faster towards a cleaner, less emissions type of energy mix. So the question to my mind is really, what is the ideal mix that gets us to where we want to get to long term, but also meets the needs in the near term? Now, it's quite clear that energy demand continues to grow the way it is and looks like it will, particularly as more and more manufacturing investments come in, more and more infrastructure projects start to get built. It's quite clear that baseload demand is going to be needed in some form or shape. So I think the government's already taken a view that through a whole bunch of planning processes that additional fossil fuel capacity is needed for that. The way I look at this is that this actually very significantly puts on us the onus of further accelerating the pace of renewables. Because we have to ask ourselves, if the overall demand is increasing and if baseload is increasing, then how do we make sure that there is even more renewables that come in to partly contribute to the baseload and then partly contribute to the intermediate and the peaking requirements? Now, that will require further enhancement of the grid. In fact, faster, shorter cycle grid capacity additions will need to be there. And the renewable purchase obligations on the other side, those need to be further enforced and driven and made even tighter, because that really allows us to do the kind of additional wind and solar that's needed. Because at the end of the day, India does have a net zero target. India does have other commitments that have been made even in a 2030 time.
Recently, Singh had said the government has addressed the critical issue of power deficiency by adding 196558 megawatt of generation capacity since April 2014, transforming our country from power deficit to power sufficient. The government has increased the generation capacity by 72.3% from 248,554 megawatt in March 2014 to 428,299 megawatt in December 2023. The gap between energy requirement and energy supplied has come down from 4.2% in 2013-14 to 0.3% in 23-24, he had said. Even this gap between energy requirement and energy supplied is generally on account of constraints in the state transmission, distribution network, and financial constraints of DISCOMs, he had pointed out. This leads us to our next question. What are the challenges that remain? And this is what Vipul had to say.
So let me share my view on this with you, Richa. I think on the conventional power side, there are challenges on securing financing, as we ourselves saw a few years ago. But that is something that as these projects move more and more towards government ownership and also sort of more underwriting of the risks by the government, that financing challenge will have to be solved. Other than on conventional energy, on the renewable side, there is really no shortage of funds available. The challenge is not the shortage of funds. The challenge really is, how do we make sure that the risk premiums associated with investing in our country and in investing in our projects can be minimized? Because the more we can minimize those risk premiums, the cheaper power we get in the country.
Right.
Now, what causes those premiums? There are primarily two factors. One factor is the country risk premium,
right,
which of course, as India's macro situation improves, that is something that will improve. It will take its own course. But the second piece is the actual project risk.
right,
And this comes down to very project specific factors,
right,
such as, for instance, is the grid going to be available the day you put on you achieve COD?
right.
Or is it going to be a slightly moving target which you have to keep adjusting? Is the land going to be available, or are you going to have to keep fighting a battle for land at each stage? Is the resource going to be underwritten, which is the wind risk or the solar risk going to be underwritten, or is that going to be totally the risk on the projects? I'm just taking 2-3 sort of examples there. And while the industry has done massively good work in terms of scale, we are one of the most ruthlessly competitive in the world. These 2-3 factors, for instance, today we are implementing projects in the Middle East. We are implementing projects in Southeast Asia as well. We are seeing, particularly in the Middle East, many of these risks are just taken away, and immediately they translate into the tariffs that are therefore achievable.
Peak electricity demand is expected to cross over 400 gigawatt by 2030, according to the ministry. So what is the right path for India? And this is what Vipul said.
Where the current priorities should be, they would fall into two main areas. One, I would say, is land and related project site related availability. And the second, I would say, is ensuring that the demand, especially for clean energy, continues to be robust, and that whether it's basically the offtake is there. Now, whether that comes because of the renewable purchase obligations, or it comes because of other means, or it comes because of let's say private customers requiring it and they needing some support to be able to access the grid. I think it could be either way, but those would be the two areas: the demand offtake side and making sure that the barriers to those are removed,
right,
and the other is the land and availability for, especially in the renewable resource rich states. But make no mistake, I think the basic alignment that this transition has to happen, and we have to find a way to get reliable, cheap, and cleaner energy. On this, I think that there is no difference between the center and the states. We must appreciate that at the state level, it is not easy at all to make this transition. The moment you get so much intermittency in the grid, the moment you have to try and therefore manage that intermittency, yet not pass on higher tariffs to the consumers. All of that needs to be managed in quite a very, very careful way. And that's the challenge. I would say there's lots of challenges. This is perhaps the most tricky industrial challenge that humanity faces, this green energy transition. But I got to tell you, uh, there were many things which even 2 years ago, as we went into COVID and all that, if you had asked me, would the payments thing get resolved? Would grid availability rules get clearer? Would open access rules become clearer? These were not intractable issues in those days. Relative to that, we are in a much better space. We can now talk about much more forward-looking, much more growth-oriented, much more transition-related challenges today. So I think we are in a better place.
For India, even it goes on adding renewable capacities, coal will remain a dominant player in the foreseeable future until alternate methods are visible. Besides, coal is just not used for power sector. The way out is to invest more in technologies and bring down dependence on thermal. There's no either or for India. For now, India has to work and balance out with both. So there is no war of coal versus renewable. This is all we had in the latest episode of Energonomics. Till we meet again. Thank you.